when a black teen uncovers a sinister plot to sabotage a billionaire's private plane. His warning not only averts a fatal tragedy but unravels a chilling web of greed and betrayal masterminded by those closest to the billionaire. What follows is a story of courage, justice, and an extraordinary bond that changes both their lives forever. Before we jump into this tale, let us know where you're watching from and if you believe the power of standing up for what's right. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories that inspire. Robert Manning leaned against the polished mahogany railing of his sprawling estate's terrace, gazing out at the manicured lawns and the gleaming lake beyond. The view was a testament to his success, each detail meticulously curated to reflect his empire, a legacy he had built from scratch. Despite his wealth and the prestige it brought, Robert felt a hollow void, one he rarely acknowledged even to himself. His wife Vanessa was nearby, reclining on a lounge chair, scrolling through her phone with the practiced elegance of someone who knew how to exude refinement, yet her presence felt distant, more like a fixture of the estate than a partner. Vanessa Manning was every bit the woman of wealth, graceful, poised, and endlessly stylish. Her tailored dress shimmered SL in the evening light, reflecting her impeccable taste. To outsiders she was the epitome of a devoted wife, but her practiced smiles and measured conversations betrayed a growing discontent. While Robert immersed himself in the mechanics of his business empire, Vanessa felt increasingly sidelined, a trophy wife relegated to hosting events and managing a life that seemed perfectly curated but devoid of connection. Robert turned, catching Vanessa's eye. Do you want to join me for dinner tonight, maybe somewhere by the water? He asked, his voice tinged with genuine effort. Vanessa glanced up briefly, her expression unreadable. I'll check my schedule, she replied, her tone distant. I might have plans. Robert nodded, his disappointment masked by years of practice. He had long since resigned himself to her vague replies and Elu's presence. Instead, he buried himself in work, finding solace in the numbers and deals that had always been his true companions. Meanwhile, on the far side of the estate, Darrell Davis pushed a lawn mower across the neatly trimmed grass, his lean frame moving with steady determination. The sun beat down on his dark skin, but Tyrell didn't falter. This job meant more than just a paycheck. It was his ticket to a future he'd long dreamed of, a college degree and a life that didn't hinge on his parents' sacrifices. His father worked double shifts at the factory while his mother cleaned houses for the wealthy families in the suburbs. They rarely complained, but Terrell saw the toll it took on them. Every dollar he earned here helped lighten their load and brought him one step closer to paying his tuition without burdening them further. Tyrell, Robert's voice called out from the terrace. Tyrell straightened, wiping the sweat from his brow before jogging over. Yes, Mr. Manning, he replied, his tone respectful but confident. Robert admired Tyrrell's work ethic, often finding his diligence a refreshing contrast to the entitlement he'd grown accustomed to. Others, you've done a great job with the garden, Robert said, gesturing toward the vibrant flower beds. I was thinking of adding some hedges near the gazebo. Think you could manage it? Terrell nodded, his smile earnest. Of course, sir, I'll make it happen. As Robert turned to leave, he paused. How's school going? You're still planning on college, right? Yes, sir, Terrell replied. I'm saving up for it. I want to make sure my parents don't have to worry about the cost. Robert gave a rare smile. Could keep that focus, it'll take you far. Vanessa had been watching the exchange from her place on the terrace, her gaze lingering on Robert's rare moment of warmth. She set her phone down. But her thoughts weren't on the young gardener or even her husband's unusual display of kindness. Her mind drifted to Ryan Carter, the man who had stirred something within her that Robert's steady but detached demeanor never could. It had started innocently enough. Ryan was a regular at the flight club. Robert frequented a charismatic and confident pilot whose stories of daring stewardess and exotic travels captivated everyone. Vanessa included. Unlike Robert's measured, pragmatic approach to flying, Ryan exuded a reckless charm that drew her in. Robert tells me you're quite the pilot, Vanessa had remarked the first time they met, her tone playful. Ryan had grinned, his teeth dazzling against his sun-kissed skin. He's being modest. I think he's better in business than he is in the cockpit. Oh, over the months, Ryan's visits to the flight club became more frequent. He and Vanessa struck up conversations often while Robert was preoccupied with other members. Ryan was quick-witted and flirtatious, filling the void of attention Vanessa hadn't realized she craved. Doesn't it get boring? Ryan had asked her one evening as they stood near the runway. All this luxury but no excitement. Vanessa had hesitated, then smiled faintly. You have no idea. That was the moment Ryan knew he had found an opportunity. He began subtly planting seeds of dissatisfaction, painting a picture of a life with him, one of spontaneity, freedom, and passion, far removed from the structured monotony of her marriage. Vanessa, already feeling neglected and restless, found herself drawn deeper into Ryan's orbit. Vanessa's resentment toward Robert grew silently. She resented his obsession with work, his inability to see her unhappiness, and his steadfast refusal to let his guard down. To her, their sprawling estate was a gilded cage, and Ryan offered a tantalizing escape. It was during one of their clandestine meetings that Ryan broached the idea of a future together. Free from Robert. You deserve better, Vanessa, he had said, his voice low and persuasive. Imagine what we could do with his resources. We'd be unstoppable. Vanessa had hesitated, the enormity of his suggestion dawning on her. You're talking about more than just leaving him, she had whispered, her voice trembling. Ryan had taken her hands in his. I'm talking about freedom for both of us. Back at the estate, Robert sat in his study reviewing contracts and projections. Unbeknownst to him, his world was about to change forever. A few days later, Vanessa Mann paced the garden, her designer heels clicking softly against the stone pathway. The evening air was cool, carrying the faint scent of freshly cut grass. The estate's garden, typically serene and meticulously maintained, now served as the backdrop for a plan that would shatter Robert's carefully constructed life. She clutched her silk shawl tightly, her gaze darting toward the distant lights of the house. Relax, Ryan said, his voice low but tinged with confidence. He leaned casually against a trellis, his pilot's jacket unzipped to reveal a crisp white shirt. No one will come looking for us out here. It's the perfect place. Vanessa exhaled sharply, her nerves betraying her normally composed demeanor. It's not the house I'm worried about, she replied. This plan, it's risky. Ryan stepped closer, his expression calm and calculated. Listen to me, Vanessa. Robert trusts that plane more than he trusts most people. He flies it all the time alone. If we sabotage the fuel system, no one will suspect foul play. It'll just look like an accident. Vanessa hesitated, her fingers tightening around her shawl. She glanced up at Ryan, searching his face for reassurance. And you're sure it'll work, that it'll look like a mechanical failure? Ryan smirked, placing a hand on her shoulder. Vanessa, I've been a pilot for years. I know exactly how to make this happen. Once it's done, we'll be free to live the life we deserve. No more playing second fiddle to his empire. The words were tempting, a siren song that fed into Vanessa's simmering resentment. She had spent years watching Robert pour his energy into his businesses, leaving her feeling invisible and unfulfilled, and yet a sliver of doubt lingered. What if something goes wrong, she asked quietly. What if they suspect me? Ryan's expression hardened, his tone firm. Nothing will go wrong, but you have to trust me. Do You want to keep living in his shadow, or do you want a life of freedom and luxury with me? Vanessa closed her eyes, letting Ryan's words wash over her. Finally she nodded, her resolve solidifying. Fine, she said, do it. Unbeknownst to the conspirators, Tyrell had been working nearby, pruning a line of hedges along the garden's edge. He was about to leave when he heard Vanessa's voice, sharp and urgent. Instinctively he crouched behind the bushes, his breath catching in his throat. He peered through the foliage, his heart pounding as he watched the two figures. Their hushed voices and furtive glances immediately struck him as suspicious. He is trained to listen, the words coming in fragmented bursts. Plain mid-flight failure. No one will suspect. Robert trusts me. We be free. The weight of their conversation hit Tyrell like a blow. He froze, the shears slipping from his hand into the grass. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. Vanessa, Robert's wife, plotting against her husband, and the man she was with wasn't Robert. Tyrell's mind raced. Should he confront them, run to Robert immediately? But his instincts told him to stay hidden for now, at least. After a few tense minutes, Vanessa and Ryan left, their figures disappearing into the dim light of the garden's far side. Tyrell exhaled, his chest tight with a mix of fear and disbelief. What had he just stumbled upon that night? Tyrell returned to the modest home he shared with his parents. The small house nestled in a quiet neighborhood was a stark contrast to the opulence of Robert's estate. As Tyrell stepped inside, the warmth of his family's presence enveloped him, but he couldn't shake the unease from earlier. His father Harold sat at the kitchen table, his hands roughened from years of factory work. His mother Celeste was washing dishes, her face tired but kind. They both looked up as Tyrell entered, immediately noticing the tension in his expression. Ty, what's wrong? Celeste asked, dry her hands on a towel. You look like you've seen a ghost. Tyrell hesitated, his heart heavy with the weight of his dilemma. He knew how much this job meant, not just to him but to his family. The money he earned was vital for his college fund, a way to ease the burden on his parents who worked tirelessly to make ends meet. Nothing, Tyrell said, at first his voice unconvincing. Just a long day. Harold frowned, setting down his newspaper. Son, we know you better than that. What's going on? Tyrell looked at his parents, their faces etched with concern. For a moment he considered keeping it to himself. What if Robert didn't believe him? What if Vanessa convinced Robert to fire him? The thought of losing his job and letting down his family gnawed him, but then he thought about Robert, the man who had always treated him with respect, who believed in his potential. He thought about the plane, the danger in the life that could be lost if he stayed silent. Finally Tyrell spoke, his voice trembling. I heard something today, something bad. It's about Mr. Manning, his wife, and another man. They're planning to sabotage his plane. Celeste gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Harold's expression darkened, his brows furrowing. Are you sure about this? he asked, his tone grave. Tyrell nodded, his hands gripping the edge of the table. I heard them in the garden. They were talking about making it look like an accident, tampering with the fuel system. Celeste sat down beside him, placing a comforting hand on his shoulder. Ty, you have to tell him, she said gently. He needs to know. But what if he doesn't believe me? Tyrell asked, his voice cracking. What if they fire me? I can't lose this job. We need the money. Harold leaned forward, his voice steady and firm. Son, sometimes doing the right thing comes with risks, but if you don't say anything and something happens to that man, could you live with yourself? Tyrell's chest tightened, his father's words hitting home. Celeste nodded in agreement. We'll figure it out, Ty, she said. If it cost you the job, so be it, but you can't let fear stop you from saving a life. Tyrell sat in silence for a moment, his parents' unwavering support giving him the strength he needed. Finally he nodded, his resolve hardening. I'll tell him, he said quietly, first thing tomorrow. Harold patted his shoulder, pride shining in his eyes. That's my boy, you're doing the right thing. As Tyrell prepared for bed that night, the fear still lingered, but it was now tempered by determination. He couldn't let Robert fly that plane, not without warning him, even if it meant risking everything. He knew he had to act. The life of a man who had shown him kindness, who believed in his future, depended on it. Will Robert believe Tyrell's words, or will Ryan and Vanessa succeed? Stay tuned to find out. The morning sun bathed the estate in warm light as Tyrell made his way toward the main house. His palms were clamming and his heartbeat thudded in his ears. The conversation from the day before replayed relentlessly in his mind, every word, every sinister implication. He knew what he had to do, but fear gripped him tightly. He stopped briefly, staring at the grand entrance to Robert Manning's mansion, steeling his resolve. Robert was on the driveway checking the morning paper as his driver prepared the car for the day. He noticed Tyrell approaching, a mixture of hesitation and urgency in his steps. The sight immediately drew Robert's attention. Tyrell, Robert greeted, folding the paper under his arm. What brings you here so early? The young man swallowed hard, nerves nearly choking his words. Mr. Manning, I need to speak to you. It's about something important. Robert frowned slightly, his sharp instincts catching the weight in Tyrell's tone. All right, go ahead. Tyrell glanced around, ensuring no one else was within earshot. His voice trembled as he spoke. Yesterday I was in the garden working near the greenhouse. I overheard something. Robert raised an eyebrow. What did you hear? It was Mrs. Manning. Tyrell continued cautiously, each word feeling heavier than the last. She was talking to Ryan. They're planning something terrible. Robert's expression shifted, a flicker of incredulity crossing his face. Vanessa and Ryan. Tyrell, you'd better explain yourself. Tyrell clenched his fists, summoning the courage To keep going, they were talking about your plane. Ryan said he was going to tamper with the fuel system to make it fail mid-flight. They're trying to make it look like an accident. I think they're trying to kill you. Robert stared at him, his brow furrowing deeply. That's a serious accusation, Tyrell. Do you have any idea what you're saying? I know it's hard to believe, Tyrell said quickly, desperation creeping into his voice, but I'm not lying. I heard them. Ryan told her exactly what he was going to do. Please, Mr. Manning, just check the plane. If I'm wrong, you can fire me, but if I'm right. Robert's initial skepticism lingered, but Tyrell's earnestness gave him pause. The young man's face was etched with sincerity and fear, and there was no trace of deception in his eyes. Robert's jaw tightened as he considered the implications. All right, Robert said at last, his tone measured. I'll have the plane inspected, but you'd better hope you're wrong about this. Less than an hour later, Robert stood on the private airstrip behind his estate, watching his trusted mechanic Mark meticulously examine his single-seat aircraft. The normally jovial mechanic wore a serious expression as he worked, his movements methodical and precise. Tyrell lingered a short distance away, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. His stomach churned as he watched Mark, the uncertainty gnawing at him. What if he had misunderstood? What if he was wrong? But every fiber of his being told him he wasn't. Finally, Mark emerged from under the plane, wiping his hands on a grease-stained rag. His face was grim as he approached Robert. Well, Robert asked, his voice steady but tense. Mark sighed heavily. It's tampered with, Mr. Manning, no doubt about it. The fuel system's been compromised and there's clear evidence of sabotage in the electrical wiring. If you'd taken this up, it would have been catastrophic. Robert's breath caught. The confirmation felt like a punch to the gut. He turned toward the plane, his gaze hardening as he absorbed the reality. Someone had tried to kill him. No, not someone. Vanessa, his wife, and Ryan, a man he had trusted as a friend. Mark continued, his tone cautious. I'll fix it right away. Robert nodded stiffly. Thank you, Mark, just take care of it. Back in the house, Robert sat in his study staring blankly at the ornate wood paneling. His mind raced, replaying the moments leading up to this revelation. Vanessa, his elegant, poised wife, had been plotting his demise with a man he had considered an ally. The betrayal ran so deep it left him feeling hollow. He leaned back in his chair, closing his eyes as the weight of it all pressed down on him. Tyrell's words echoed in his mind. Please just check the plane. The teenager had risked his livelihood and possibly his future to tell him the truth. Without that warning, Robert might not be sitting here now. His thoughts shifted to Ryan. The man had been charming, clever, and easy to like, qualities that now felt like a facade. In Vanessa, her distant behavior, her discontent with their life, suddenly took on a sinister meaning. She had been disloyal in ways he could never have imagined. A knock at the door broke his reverie. It was Tyrell standing hesitantly in the doorway. Mr. Manning, he said quietly, I wanted to make sure you're okay. Robert looked up, his expression softening slightly. I'm fine, Tyrell, and I owe you. If you hadn't spoken up. He trailed off, unable to finish the thought. Tyrell shifted uncomfortably. I just did what I thought was right, sir. The weight of betrayal was still heavy on Robert's shoulders as he paced his study, the grandeur of the room doing little to lighten his mood. Tyrell sat nearby, the teenager's posture tense but resolute. Robert stopped mid-stride, his piercing gaze fixed on Tyrell. You saved my life, Robert began, his tone carrying both gratitude and an edge of steel. I don't take that lightly, but now I need your help again. What we're dealing with requires precision and I can't trust anyone else. Tyrell blinked in surprise. Me, sir, what could I possibly do? Robert leaned against the desk, folding his arms. You've already proven you can be trusted. Vanessa and Ryan think they're smarter than me, that they've covered their tracks, but we're going to show them otherwise. I need you to work with me to bring them down. Tyrell nodded hesitantly, the gravity of the situation dawning on him. I'll do whatever I can, Mr. Manning. Good, Robert said firmly. Here's what we'll do. Robert's first move was to update his will in the austere office of his lawyer. Robert sat upright, his demeanor a portrait of determination. The lawyer, a seasoned professional who had worked with Robert for years, observed him silently, sensing the weight of the decision. I want Vanessa removed entirely, Robert said, his tone resolute. She is no longer to receive a penny of my estate. The lawyer paused, his pen hovering over the document. Are you certain about this, Robert? It's a significant change. I've never been more certain about anything, Robert replied, leaning forward. She's lost any claim to my trust and I won't allow her to profit from this betrayal. Make it happen. The lawyer raised an eyebrow but nodded. Understood. Make sure it's ironclad. Robert exhaled slowly, the act of disinheriting his wife a painful yet necessary step. He thought of their early years when Vanessa had been his partner in every sense of the word. That image felt like a distant memory, now replaced by the cold reality of her betrayal. Back at the estate, Robert and Tyrell reconvened to finalize the counterplot. They sat in the study, a map of the region spread across the desk. Robert traced a finger along a remote stretch of forest, his expression contemplative. We'll stage a crash here, Robert said, tapping the location. It's far enough from any towns but accessible enough for the authorities to find. Tyrell frowned, unsure. How will we make it look real? Won't they know you're not on the plane? Robert smiled faintly, the first flicker of amusement breaking through his stern demeanor. That's where the details come in. Ryan tampered with the fuel system, but Mark already fixed that. Will simulate the damage, make it look like the plane malfunctioned mid-flight. How? Tyrell asked, leaning forward. I've arranged for a remote-controlled detonation device, Robert explained. It'll trigger a small explosion, just enough to mimic what Ryan intended. The plane will crash and they'll think their plan worked. Tyrell stared at him, a mixture of awe and apprehension in his eyes. You've really thought this through? Robert nodded grimly. When you've been in business as long as I have, you learn to anticipate people's moves. Vanessa and Ryan think they've won, but this will give us the upper hand. The preparations were exhaustive. Mark, Robert's trusted mechanic, was brought into the fold under strict confidentiality. Together they modified the aircraft to ensure it could be safely piloted remotely and prepared it for the staged crash. The details were painstaking, down to planting documents in the wreckage that would make the scene more convincing. Tyrell, despite his initial nervousness, proved to be an invaluable asset. He worked tirelessly assisting Mark and keeping a watchful eye on Vanessa and Ryan's movements around the estate. His keen observations provided Robert with vital insights into their routine and behavior. One evening, as they reviewed the final steps of the plan, Robert looked at Tyrell with newfound respect. You've handled this with more composure than most adults I know, he remarked. I don't say this lightly. You've got a bright future ahead of you. Tyrell flushed slightly at the compliment but remained focused. I just want to make sure they don't get away with this, sir. Robert's expression darkened. They won't, not this time. The night before the staged crash, Robert called Vanessa into the study under the pretense of discussing travel plans. She entered gracefully, her polished demeanor masking the storm brewing within. Robert watched her closely, searching for any hint of guilt or hesitation. I've been thinking, Robert began casually, swirling a glass of scotch. It's been a while since we took a trip together. Maybe after my next flight we can get away for a while. Vanessa's smile was practiced, but there was a flicker of discomfort in her eyes. That sounds lovely, she replied smoothly. You've been working so hard lately. A break would do you good. Robert nodded, his gaze never leaving hers. You're right, it's important to take time for the things that matter. Vanessa excused herself shortly after, and Robert watched her retreating figure, his jaw tightening. He knew her polished exterior hid a darker truth, and it strengthened his resolve to see the plan through. As the final details were locked into place, Robert and Tyrell shared a quiet moment in the hangar. The plane gleamed under the overhead lights, its appearance giving no hint of the drama about to unfold. You ready for this? Robert asked, his tone softer than usual. Tyrell nodded firmly. I'm ready. Robert placed a hand on his shoulder, a rare gesture of warmth. You've done more for me than you know, Tyrell. After this, things are going to change for both of us. Tyrell met his gaze, a flicker of determination in his eyes. Let's do it, sir. With everything in place, they stepped into the night, ready to set the counterplot into motion. The next day would mark the beginning of the end for Vanessa and Ryan, and Robert knew there was no turning back now. The stage was set and the players were in position. All that remained was to watch the plan unfold. In the quiet pre-dawn hours, Robert and Tyrell worked methodically to execute their daring plan. The decoy aircraft, an old single-seat plane Robert had purchased for parts years earlier, sat in a secluded field far from the prying eyes of the estate or any curious onlookers. The two carefully doused the plane's exterior with a blend of fuel and accelerants, ensuring the illusion of a fiery crash. Remember, Tyrell, Robert said, glancing at the young man, this has to look real. If they catch even the slightest inconsistency, the plan falls apart. I understand, Mr. Manning, Tyrell replied, his voice steady despite the weight of the situation. He checked the area one last time, ensuring no evidence would point back to their involvement. His attention to detail impressed Robert, a quality he found increasingly invaluable. With everything in place, Robert set the timer on the incendiary device installed inside the aircraft. We'll need to be far from here when this goes off, he said. The timer ticked away as the two stepped back, leaving the decoy ready for its final act. As the flames erupted on schedule, they stood at a safe distance, the inferno illuminating the early morning sky. The crackling fire consumed the plane, leaving no identifiable remnants. Tyrell watched with a mix of awe and apprehension. It's intense, Tyrell said quietly, shielding his eyes from the heat. It has to be, Robert replied, his voice held a tinge of sadness, but his resolve was firm. This is the only way to draw them out. They have to believe I'm gone. Later that morning, the news broke. Robert Manning, the renowned billionaire, had perished in a tragic aircraft accident. The headline spread like wildfire, accompanied by images of the charred wreckage. The story dominated every media outlet, describing a catastrophic engine failure and a fiery crash in a remote field back at the mansion. Vanessa played the grieving widow to perfection. Draped in a sleek black dress, she welcomed mourners with a somber expression, her every gesture calculated to project sorrow. Yet behind closed doors she shared stolen moments with Ryan, her true emotions far from the surface. That's it, Ryan said, his tone triumphant as he poured them both glasses of champagne in a hidden corner of the house. We've won, no one suspects a thing. Vanessa took a sip, her lips curving into a faint smile. It feels surreal, she admitted, her voice low, but you're right, finally we can start the life we've dreamed of. Ryan leaned in, his voice conspiratorial. Now we need to focus on the inheritance. The sooner we secure the money, the sooner we can leave this place behind. Vanessa nodded, her mind already racing with plans for their future. She felt exhilarated, as if the burdens of her previous life were burning away like the wreckage of Robert's plane. Meanwhile, Tyrell stayed close to the mansion, watching the two conspirators from the periphery. Using his phone, he discreetly documented their interactions, noting every whispered conversation and covert meeting. He knew he had to act carefully. Vanessa and Ryan's confidence made them sloppy, but they were far from foolish. Late one evening, Tyrell caught a crucial moment from his hidden vantage point in the garden. He saw Ryan hand Vanessa a small envelope. Vanessa opened it quickly, glancing inside before slipping it into her purse. "This is the account information," Ryan murmured. "We'll need to move fast once the will is read." "Don't worry," Vanessa replied, her voice laced with smug assurance. "Robert was thorough, but I know the lawyer. He won't stand in our way." Tyrell's heart pounded as he captured the exchange on video there. Incriminating words echoing in his mind, every piece of evidence brought them closer to exposing the truth. He couldn't help but feel a surge of satisfaction. They thought Robert was gone, but their downfall was already in motion. Returning to Robert's safe house that night, Tyrell shared the latest footage. Robert's expression darkened as he watched, his jaw tightening. "They're already positioning themselves to take everything," Robert said grimly, "but they don't realize the walls are closing in." Tyrell, though exhausted from his efforts, met Robert's gaze with unwavering determination. "We'll stop them, Mr. Manning. We just have to stick to the plan." Robert placed a hand on Tyrell's shoulder, a rare gesture of gratitude. "We're almost their son. They've laid their own trap. Now we just have to spring it." As the staged crash began to achieve its intended effect, Robert and Tyrell prepared for the final stages of their counterplot. The conspirators believed they were untouchable, but their actions were leading them straight into the web Robert and Tyrell had meticulously woven. Vanessa and Ryan sat side by side in the somber yet luxurious office of Robert Manning's lawyer. The atmosphere was heavy with faux grief, but Vanessa maintained her air of elegance, her expression carefully neutral. Ryan, more impatient by nature, tapped his fingers against the arm of his chair, glancing around the room. His lips twitched into a barely restrained smirk. "This is it," Ryan whispered under his breath, leaning closer to Vanessa. "After today, it's all ours." Vanessa gave a slight nod, her gaze fixed on the polished mahogany desk. Her practiced demeanor masked the excitement swirling beneath the surface. For weeks she'd rehearsed this moment in her mind, imagining the freedom that Robert's wealth would bring her. She'd convinced herself that everything she'd done was justified, a necessary step to escape the gilded cage of her marriage. The lawyer, an older man with an air of gravitas, entered the room and took his seat across from them. He opened a thick folder, its contents neatly organized, and adjusted his glasses. "Thank you for coming, Mrs. Manning," he said formally. His tone was solemn, yet there was a glint of something unreadable in his eyes. "And Mr. Reed, I understand this is a difficult time for you both." "Yes, thank you," Vanessa replied smoothly, her voice tinged with the right amount of melancholy. "It's been overwhelming." Ryan cleared his throat, adding, "We just want to honor Robert's wishes and ensure everything is handled properly." The lawyer nodded, flipping through the documents. "Of course, Mr. Manning was a meticulous man, as you both know. His will reflects that attention to detail." As the lawyer began listing Robert's assets, properties, investments, and other holdings, Vanessa's heart quickened. Each mention of a property or account brought her closer to the fortune she and Ryan had schemed for. She kept her expression poised, though her mind was already racing with plans. Ryan, however, struggled to contain his anticipation. His foot tapped against the floor and he leaned forward as the lawyer spoke. "Let's cut to the chase," he interrupted at one point, earning a sharp glance from Vanessa. "We all know Mrs. Manning is the beneficiary." The lawyer paused, his gaze shifting to Ryan with a hint of disapproval. "Patience, Mr. Reed," he said coolly. "We're almost there." Vanessa placed a calming hand on Ryan's arm, her fingers tightening slightly in warning. "Let him proceed," she murmured, her tone sweet but firm. The lawyer continued reading, but as he approached the final section of the will, his tone shifted. "Now there is one important update to the will that Mr. Manning requested shortly before his passing," he said, his voice deliberate. Vanessa's brow furrowed slightly. "Update?" she repeated, glancing at Ryan, who stiffened beside her. The lawyer looked directly at Vanessa, his expression unreadable. "Yes, Mr. Manning amended the will to reflect his final wishes. According to this update, Mrs. Manning is no longer a beneficiary." The room fell into a stunned silence. Vanessa blinked, her composure cracking for the first time. "I'm sorry, what?" she said, her voice faltering. The lawyer's gaze didn't waver. "Mr. Manning removed you from the will. None of his assets are to be transferred to you." Ryan's face darkened, his hands curling into fists. "That's ridiculous," he exclaimed. "Robert would never do that. There must be a mistake." "I assure you, there is no mistake," the lawyer replied calmly, sliding the updated document across the desk. "This is Mr. Manning's signature, dated and notarized." Vanessa's mask of grief dissolved into disbelief and anger. She snatched the document, scanning it with wide eyes. Her voice rose, trembling with fury. This isn't possible. He wouldn't do this to me." Ryan stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "This is some kind of trick," he snarled. "Who put you up to this?" Before the lawyer could respond, the door behind them creaked open. The room fell into a heavy silence as Robert Manning stepped inside, alive and well. His imposing figure filled the doorway, his expression unreadable but his eyes cold as steel. Vanessa froze, her breath hitching. Her hands gripped the edge of the desk, knuckles white. Ryan staggered back a step, his face pale with shock. "Surprised to see me?" Robert asked evenly, his voice carrying the weight of betrayal and controlled fury. Vanessa opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Her carefully constructed world was crumbling before her eyes. Ryan, regaining some composure, tried to stammer out a defense. "Robert, we thought." "Save it, Ryan," Robert interrupted, his sharp glare silencing him. "I know everything." He stepped further into the room, his gaze shifting to Vanessa. "The affair, the sabotage, the plan to take my life and my fortune." His voice grew harder with each accusation, like hammer blows. Vanessa's facade finally shattered. "Robert, please," she pleaded, tears streaming down her face. "You have to understand." "Understand what?" Robert interrupted. "That you betrayed me? That you plotted with this man to kill me?" "Spare me your excuses, Vanessa." Ryan, sensing the walls closing in, attempted to deflect. "This was all her idea," he blurted, pointing at Vanessa. "She's the one who..." "Don't you dare!" Vanessa snapped, her grief giving way to anger. "You're the one who convinced me." "Enough!" Robert's voice thundered, silencing them both. He turned to the lawyer and gave a slight nod. At that moment, two uniformed police officers entered the room. Vanessa and Ryan's protests turned to panic as the officers approached, handcuffing them with practiced efficiency. "You can't do this!" Vanessa screamed, her voice shrill with desperation. "Robert, please! I loved you." Robert didn't respond, his gaze steady as he watched them being led away. The betrayal burned deep, but justice had been served. As the door closed behind them, Robert turned to Tyrell, who had entered quietly and stood by the wall, watching everything unfold. "Thank you, Tyrell," Robert said, his voice softening for the first time. "I couldn't have done this without you." Tyrell nodded, his respect for Robert growing even more. They had fought deception and greed together, and the truth had prevailed. The arrest of Vanessa and Ryan sent shockwaves through affluent circles of society. Vanessa Manning, the poised and elegant wife of a billionaire, and Ryan Reed, a once promising pilot, now stood accused of attempted murder and conspiracy. The media latched onto the story, broadcasting every sordid detail of betrayal, greed, and deception. The trial began under a storm of flashing cameras and relentless journalists. Headlines screamed phrases like "Billionaire's betrayal," "Flight Club conspiracy," and "Murder plot foiled by courageous teen." Every day, the courthouse steps became a stage for pundits, reporters, and curious onlookers. Inside, the courtroom was packed with spectators eager to witness the drama unfold. Robert sat calmly on the front bench, his expression unreadable as he faced the two people who had plotted his demise. Tyrell, seated beside him, looked out of place in the sea of suits and designer dresses, yet his quiet confidence mirrored the man he had come to admire deeply. The prosecution wasted no time laying out their case, detailing how Ryan had tampered with Robert's aircraft, citing forensic evidence of deliberate sabotage. Tyrell's testimony, however, proved to be the most damning. When called to the stand, he took a deep breath and glanced at his parents, who were seated behind him, offering silent encouragement. Tyrell recounted the events of that fateful day with clarity and conviction. "They talked about tampering with Mr. Manning's aircraft," Tyrell said, his voice steady despite the gravity of the situation. "Ryan said it would look like an accident, and Vanessa agreed." The courtroom murmured as Tyrell revealed he had secretly recorded parts of their conversation on his phone. The prosecutor played the audio for the jury, the chilling exchange echoing through the room. Vanessa's voice, unmistakably calm, could be heard saying, "It's the only way. Once it's done, we'll be free." Ryan's response, laced with arrogance, followed. "He'll never see it coming. By the time anyone realizes, it'll all be ours." The defense attempted to discredit Tyrell. "You're just a gardener, correct?" Ryan's lawyer sneered, attempting to diminish his credibility. "Why should anyone believe you?" Tyrell remained composed. "I may be a gardener," he replied firmly, "but I know right from wrong, and I wasn't going to let an innocent man lose his life." Robert nodded subtly, pride flickering in his otherwise stoic demeanor. Tyrell's words carried a truth that was impossible to refute, and the jury seemed to sense it. When Ryan took the stand, his defense strategy became clear: shift the blame entirely onto Vanessa. His demeanor was contrite, almost pitiful, as he claimed to be a victim of her manipulation. Vanessa was the one who came up with the plan, he insisted, his voice tinged with desperation. She told me she felt trapped in her marriage, that she needed a way out. I never wanted to hurt Robert. She pushed me into it. Vanessa's face turned crimson with rage. Her calm facade finally breaking, she whispered furiously to her attorney, gesturing at Ryan. But her lawyer urged her to remain composed. The prosecutor seized the moment. Are you saying you had no part in the sabotage? That you're completely innocent? Ryan hesitated, his eyes darting nervously. I tampered with the plane, but only because Vanessa threatened me. She said she'd ruin my career, my life, if I didn't help her. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Vanessa, unable to hold back any longer, stood abruptly. That's a lie, she shouted, her voice trembling with indignation. You're the one who said it was the perfect plan. You told me you'd done this kind of thing before. The judge banged his gavel. Order in the court, he commanded, but the damage was done. Vanessa and Ryan's mutual accusations had laid bare the extent of their treachery, each implicating the other further with every word. When Vanessa took the stand, her defense unraveled even more. Her lawyer tried to portray her as a neglected wife driven to desperation by an emotionally distant husband. I was lonely, Vanessa admitted, tears streaming down her face. Robert cared more about his businesses than he ever cared about me. Ryan, he made me feel alive again. The prosecutor was relentless. Loneliness doesn't justify attempted murder, Mrs. Manning. Did you or did you not agree to the plan to sabotage Mr. Manning's aircraft? Vanessa hesitated, her hands trembling. I didn't think he'd actually go through with it, she stammered. It was just talk. The prosecutor pressed further. And yet, here we are. With evidence of tampering and audio recordings of you discussing the plan in detail. Were you just talking then, Mrs. Manning? Vanessa broke down, sobbing uncontrollably. Ryan's smirk from across the room only fueled her anger. It was his idea, she screamed, pointing at him. He planned everything. The prosecution rested its case with the damning evidence of their conspiracy laid bare. The jury deliberated for only a few hours before returning with a unanimous verdict, guilty on all counts. Vanessa and Ryan were sentenced to lengthy prison terms, the weight of their crimes ensuring they would spend decades behind bars. As the two were led away in handcuffs, Vanessa turned to Robert, her tear-streaked face a mixture of anger and despair. You ruined me, she hissed. You'll regret this. Robert didn't flinch. No, Vanessa, he said quietly. You ruined yourself. Ryan, still defiant, sneered as he passed Tyrell. Enjoy playing the hero, kid, he muttered. It won't last. Tyrell didn't respond, his gaze steady as he watched the two conspirators disappear from view. He had done what was right, and the truth had prevailed. The courtroom emptied, leaving Robert and Tyrell alone in the quiet aftermath. Robert placed a hand on Tyrell's shoulder, his voice low but firm. You saved my life, Tyrell. You've shown courage beyond your years, and I'll never forget it. In the days following the trial, Robert Manning found himself in uncharted emotional territory. For years, his life had been consumed by the pursuit of success, a relentless cycle of deals, acquisitions, and expansions. Yet, sitting in the quiet solitude of his sprawling estate, he felt an unfamiliar ache. The betrayal by Vanessa, the woman he once trusted with his life, and Ryan, a man he had considered a friend, left him questioning everything. But amidst the wreckage of his shattered trust, one constant shone through: Tyrell. Robert thought back to Tyrell's courage, how a young man with everything to lose had risked it all to save a life. The thought filled him with a profound sense of gratitude but also a lingering guilt. He realized how easily he could have dismissed Tyrell's warning, brushing aside the quiet resolve of someone he had underestimated. That boy had given him a second chance, and Robert knew he had to repay the debt in more ways than one. Determined to express his appreciation, Robert arranged a visit to Tyrell's home. Stepping into the modest house, he was greeted warmly by Tyrell's parents, who exuded the same integrity and strength of character as their son. Mr. and Mrs. Washington, dressed neatly despite their weariness from long workdays, were humble and gracious, though clearly taken aback by the billionaire's presence in their living room. "Mr. Manning," Tyrell's father began, extending a firm handshake. "It's an honor to have you here, but I must say, we're surprised by your visit." Robert smiled, his demeanor uncharacteristically softened. "Please, call me Robert. And the honor is mine. I came here to thank you both for raising a young man as remarkable as Tyrell. His bravery and values reflect the foundation you've given him." Mrs. Washington's eyes brimmed with pride as she glanced at Tyrell, who sat quietly, his usual composure faltering under the weight of Robert's praise. "We're proud of him," she said, her voice steady despite the emotion in her eyes. "He's always been a good boy, and we're glad he could help you." Robert turned to Tyrell, his expression sullen yet warm. "You did more than help, Tyrell. You saved my life. And in doing so, you've given me the opportunity to reflect on what truly matters." The words hung in the air, heavy with sincerity. Then Robert addressed Tyrell's parents directly. "I understand how hard you've worked to provide for your family. Tyrell told me how much this job meant to him, not just for himself, but for all of you. I admire that deeply. That's why I want to help." Tyrell shifted in his seat, unsure of what was coming next. His father frowned slightly, his protective instincts kicking in. "What do you mean, Mr. Manning?" Robert's voice was firm but kind. "I want to fund Tyrell's college education, fully. I don't want your family to bear the financial burden of his dreams when he's already proven his worth tenfold. And beyond that," Robert glanced at Tyrell, "I want to take him under my wing. Tyrell, if you'll accept, I'd like to mentor you. Not just as a businessman, but as someone who sees great potential in you." The room fell silent. Mrs. Washington pressed her hand to her chest, blinking back tears. "That's an incredible offer, Mr. Manning," she said softly. "But it's up to Tyrell." Tyrell looked between his parents and Robert, his emotions threatening to overwhelm him. I don't know what to say," he stammered. "This is more than I ever imagined." "You don't have to decide right now," Robert assured him. "But I want you to know that this isn't charity, it's an investment in someone I believe in. And if you accept, I promise to guide you every step of the way." Tyrell's father placed a hand on his son's shoulder, giving it a reassuring squeeze. "Son, you've always worked hard for what you've earned. This is no different. If Mr. Manning believes in you, and you believe in yourself, I think you should go for it." With a deep breath, Tyrell nodded. "I accept, Mr. Manning. And thank you. I'll work hard to prove that your belief in me wasn't misplaced." Robert smiled, a genuine warmth spreading across his face. "I don't doubt it for a second." From that day forward, Tyrell became an integral part of Robert's life. The bond between the two grew stronger with each passing week. Robert enrolled Tyrell in a prestigious university, ensuring he had access to the best education money could buy. At the same time, he began introducing Tyrell to the world of business, teaching him the intricacies of leadership, negotiation, and strategy. The lessons went beyond academics in boardrooms. Robert emphasized the importance of integrity and responsibility, instilling in Tyrell the values that had guided his own success. "Wealth and power mean nothing if they aren't used wisely," Robert often told him. "Your character is what defines you, not your bank account." Tyrell took to the mentorship with enthusiasm and determination, excelling in his studies while soaking up every piece of wisdom Robert shared. His natural intelligence and work ethic made him a quick learner, and before long, he began contributing fresh ideas to Robert's business ventures. For Robert, the relationship filled a void he hadn't realized was so profound. With no children of his own, he found in Tyrell the son he never had, someone who not only shared his drive but also challenged him to see the world through a different lens. Their bond transcended mentor and mentee, evolving into a partnership rooted in mutual respect and trust. One evening, as they reviewed a proposal in Robert's study, Tyrell paused, looking thoughtful. "Mr. Manning," he began hesitantly, Do you ever regret everything that happened with Vanessa and Ryan? Robert leaned back in his chair, his expression contemplative. Regret? No, he said after a moment. I see it as a painful but necessary lesson. It reminded me of what truly matters: loyalty, integrity, and the people who stand by you when things fall apart. Years had passed since the tumultuous events that forever changed Robert Manning's life. The sprawling estate, once a symbol of wealth and solitude, now radiated warmth and purpose. In the heart of it all stood Tyrell Washington, no longer the shy teenager tending the gardens, but a confident and capable leader, poised to inherit the empire Robert had built with a lifetime of effort. Tyrell had grown into his role, blending Robert's teachings with his own unique perspective. Under his guidance, the company expanded beyond profit-driven ventures, creating programs to support underprivileged youth and foster community development. Tyrell's vision wasn't just about business, it was about building a legacy that resonated far beyond corporate walls. On a sunny afternoon, Robert and Tyrell sat together on the patio overlooking the vast gardens where their journey had begun. Tyrell, now in his late 20s, wore a tailored suit that reflected his position, but his demeanor remained humble and grounded. Robert, though older and walking with a slower gait, still carried the sharpness and wit that had defined his success. "You've done well, Trell," Robert said, his voice tinged with pride. "Better than I ever imagined. The company is thriving, and more importantly, it's making a real difference." Tyrell smiled, leaning forward. "I couldn't have done any of this without you, Mr. Manning. You saw something in me when I didn't even see it in myself. You gave me a chance to prove I could be more." Robert shook his head, his expression thoughtful. "No, Tyrell. I only opened a door. You walked through it and built something extraordinary on the other side. I've watched you grow into a man who not only leads but inspires," Robert continued. "That's all you. You taught me that integrity is everything, that doing the right thing, even when it's hard, is what defines true leadership. It's what guided me when I decided to start the youth initiatives." Robert nodded, his gaze distant for a moment. "When I was younger, I thought success was measured in numbers, in wealth and power. But life has a way of teaching you what really matters. Watching you build these programs, seeing how they've changed lives, that's the kind of legacy I never dreamed of. And it's all because of you." The youth initiatives Tyrell referred to had become a cornerstone of the company's mission. Scholarships, mentorship programs, and career training centers now provided opportunities to countless young people from disadvantaged backgrounds. Tyrell had drawn from his own experiences, creating pathways for others who, like him, had faced financial and social barriers. The initiatives became a testament to the values Robert had instilled in him. One evening, at a gala honoring the company's contributions to the community, Tyrell stood at the podium to deliver a speech. Robert watched from the front row, his heart swelling with pride as Tyrell addressed a packed audience. "This isn't just about me or Mr. Manning," Tyrell said, his voice steady and sincere. "It's about paying forward the opportunities we've been given. I was once a teenager with big dreams but limited means. Today, I'm standing here because someone believed in me. And now, it's my turn to believe in others, to ensure that no dream goes unrealized because of circumstance." The audience erupted in applause, and Robert felt a lump form in his throat. In Tyrell's words, he saw the culmination of everything he had hoped for, a legacy not of wealth alone, but of compassion and purpose. Later that night, back at the estate, Robert and Tyrell shared a quiet moment in the study. The room, lined with shelves of books and mementos of Robert's career, felt alive with the energy of the night's events. "You're not just my protege, Tyrell," Robert said, breaking the silence. "You're the son I never had. I've spent a lifetime building this empire, but you've given it meaning. You've turned it into something greater than I ever could have." Tyrell looked at Robert, his expression a mixture of gratitude and resolve. "For as long as I'm here, I'll carry forward what you started. I'll make sure your legacy is one of hope and opportunity." For Robert, this was the legacy he wanted to leave behind, not just a thriving empire, but a young man with the integrity and vision to carry it forward.